For 30,000 years, the entrance sat hidden beneath a wall of stone, buried under windblown dust, heat, and silence so complete that even the desert forgot it was there. No maps marked it. No stories warned about it. No animal had crawled through the opening since the last ice age, and when the rock finally gave way, the people standing there thought they were about to find bones. Maybe old tools, maybe nothing at all. What they found instead should not have existed, because deep behind that sealed entrance, beyond a crawl space no wider than a coffin, was a chamber holding something no archaeologist expected to see in a world that old. Shelves? Not natural ledges, not random piles of rock, real carved recesses running along the walls in orderly rows, and inside them sat flat stone tablets, stacked upright like books in a library no human eye had seen for 30,000 years. That discovery began in one of the driest places on Earth, where a survey team had been sent to inspect a fractured limestone ridge after a seasonal flood tore through a remote desert basin. The flood had opened cracks along the escarpment, and one of the engineers noticed a strange current of cold air pushing out through a gap in the rock. In that kind of heat, cold air means empty space underground. Most people would have logged it, taken a few photos, and moved on. But one of the workers dropped a strip of survey tape near the opening and watched it pull inward, then flutter back out again as if the cliff itself were breathing. That was enough to stop the whole team. The gap was too narrow to enter, so they cleared loose stone by hand first, then brought in a small camera rig. When the lens slipped through the crack and its light spilled into the darkness, the feed showed a hollow chamber beyond the collapse. The walls were smooth, the floor looked untouched, and then the camera tilted slightly left, and somebody on the surface said the words nobody there would forget. Are those handprints? Within days, the site was locked down. Local authorities brought in archaeologists, geologists, climate specialists, and cave preservation teams. The rockfall at the entrance was examined first, because before anyone touched what was inside, they needed to know one thing. Had the cave really been sealed that long? The answer came from layers of compacted sediment, mineral growth over the fallen stone, and the collapse pattern itself. The geology pointed to a violent event near the end of the late Pleistocene, likely triggered by a quake, followed by slope failure. Once that entrance went down, Itztajed Dune, wind could not enter. Rain could not wash through. Sunlight never reached the interior again. The cave had not simply been hidden, it had been locked. That is what made the next discovery so disturbing. When the first research team finally entered, they expected the usual signs of prehistoric use. Soot on the ceiling, stone flakes, animal bones, maybe paintings if they were lucky. And yes, they found some of that. Charcoal flecks still rested near the wall. Faint red pigment marks clung to a corridor bend. The floor preserved heel prints in ancient dust. But the deeper they moved in, the less the cave looked like a shelter, and the more it looked like a place built for a purpose. Because at the far end of the first chamber, beyond the low stone arch blackened by ancient smoke, stood a room with straight lines no one was prepared to explain. And along those walls waited hundreds of carved stone slabs arranged in rows too deliberate, too organized, and too intelligent to be ignored. What the team had opened was not just a cave. It was an archive, and the symbols cut into those tablets would soon force experts to ask a question far bigger than who made them. They would have to ask why writing seemed to be staring back at them from a time when writing was not supposed to exist at all. The deeper chamber measured roughly 40 feet across, with a ceiling high enough for a grown adult to stand without ducking. The air was dry, motionless, and colder than the outer passage. Nothing stirred. No insects. No dripping water. No modern contamination. It felt less like stepping into a cave, and more like entering a room that had been waiting. Then the headlamps swept across the walls. Every side of the chamber had been shaped by human hands. Shallow recesses had been cut into the limestone in long horizontal bands. Each recess held flat stone plaques, some no larger than a hand, others the length of a forearm. Many were broken, many were intact. But what mattered was not just that they had been stored, it was how they had been stored. Grouped, sorted, repeated. Some slabs carried simple animal figures, but not in the flowing style seen in famous Ice Age cave art. These were tighter, more structured. A gazelle shape might appear beside a crescent mark. a bird beside a ladder-like pattern, a row of dots beside a cluster of lines cut so evenly they looked measured. Other plaques held no animals at all, only symbols arranged in columns and bands. Not random scratches, not decoration. Patterns. At first, the team thought they might be tally marks. Hunting records. Perhaps a seasonal count. But as more tablets were photographed, catalogued, and digitally scanned, the repetition became harder to dismiss. Certain signs kept returning in the same sequence. Some symbols appeared only at the beginning of lines. Others clustered at the end. A few plaques seemed to contain dividers, almost like sections or headings. If that interpretation was correct, the implications were enormous, because the accepted timeline places the earliest true writing systems far later, tied to large agricultural societies, trade accounting, urban complexity, and permanent settlement. That was the model. That was the sequence. First farming, then cities, then writing. But this cave did not fit the model. These people lived tens of thousands of years before that world. They were supposed to be mobile hunter-gatherers, highly capable, deeply intelligent, artistically rich, yes, but still far from formal written language. And yet the chamber told a different story. One wall held something even stranger. A carefully prepared panel, coated in pale mineral wash, smoother than the surrounding rock. Across it ran rows of incised symbols above a band of handprints. Adult hands. Smaller hands. One hand with two fused fingers. The same unusual feature appeared on multiple prints across the room, suggesting one individual had returned again and again, leaving a visible path through the archive. A single person, or perhaps a keeper of the chamber. Someone who did not just visit this place, but belonged to it. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to subscribe. Because what they found next turned this from a mystery into a direct challenge to everything we thought early humans were capable of. Near the center of the room sat a circular stone platform no higher than the knee, surrounded by broken fragments that had fallen in a rough ring around it. When the fragments were reassembled digitally, researchers realized they once formed a domed object covered in tiny punctures and engraved arcs. It looked almost decorative until one of the astronomers on the consulting team matched the pattern against reconstructed Paleolithic skies. The arcs aligned with lunar cycles. The punctures tracked repeating star positions, and one engraved cluster appeared to mark a meteor event, believed to have been visible in that region around the same era suggested by the cave ceiling. That meant the chamber may not have been storage alone. It may have been a record, a place where information was preserved, organized, taught, and passed on. Not memory held in stories alone. Memory fixed in stone. And if that was true, then the people who built this cave were doing something history says they should not have been doing for another 20,000 years. They were not just surviving. They were documenting. Once the first shock faded, the real work began. Samples were taken from charcoal, trapped beneath fallen fragments, from soot stains on the ceiling, from plant fiber caught in a crack behind one of the stone plaques. Every procedure moved slowly, because one careless mistake could destroy evidence that had outlived entire civilizations. The results came back in stages, and each stage made the story harder to explain away. The oldest material dated to just over 31,000 years before present. A later cluster fell closer to 29,000. That suggested the chamber had not been used once and forgotten. People came back. They added to it. They handled the tablets, lit fires, marked walls, and returned enough times for the cave to become part of a long-lived tradition rather than a single event. Then the linguists and cognitive archaeologists started weighing in. No one claimed it was a fully deciphered language. That would have been reckless. The honest position was narrower and, in some ways, more explosive. The markings showed structured recurrence, positional rules, symbolic clustering, and enough internal order to suggest a formal communication system, something beyond art, beyond decoration, and beyond casual notation. In plain terms, this did not look like doodling. It looked intentional. One research team built a probability model to test whether the sign sequences could have happened by chance. The answer was no, not at the rates they were seeing. Another team studied where patterns on the tablets and found polished edge zones where fingers had repeatedly gripped the same stones over time. Some slabs even carried shallow, corrective cuts, as though a sign had been reworked or updated. That detail chilled the room when it was first presented, because corrections imply standards. Standards imply teaching, and teaching implies that somebody, somewhere in that distant world, believed this information mattered enough to preserve accurately. The cave was no longer being discussed as an art site alone. It was being discussed as a knowledge site. That shift changed everything. In the side passage beyond the chamber, more evidence waited. The corridor narrowed and then opened into a smaller room with a low ceiling and nearly perfect acoustics. One cleft near the back wall traveled in a soft rolling echo that lingered longer than it should have. Along the edges of that room stood thin stone pillars, some natural, some shaped. When tapped gently with padded instruments, they produced different tones. Not music in the modern sense, but clearly sound, deliberate sound. It raised a possibility nobody could prove, yet nobody could ignore. What if this place had been used not only to store knowledge, but to perform it? To recite it. To teach through rhythm, chant, repetition, and symbol together. That would make the cave something far more sophisticated than a hiding place. It would make it a classroom, a sanctuary, or both. On the clay floor of that acoustic chamber, preserved under a crust of dust, the team found a final set of prints. One belonged to a child. Beside it ran the partial print of an adult with the same fused fingers seen on the wall marks in the archive room. The two sets moved toward the back wall, stopped, turned, and returned. That tiny scene carried more emotional force than any tablet, because suddenly the cave was no longer abstract. It was human. A child was brought here, guided here, shown something here. 30,000 years ago, in total darkness, someone took another person by the hand and passed on knowledge they believed must not be lost. And yet for all the breakthroughs, one terrifying question remained untouched. If this cave held an archive, where were the people who made it? There were no burial pits in the main chamber, no skeletons arranged ceremonially, no signs of violence, no desperate scramble at the sealed entrance. The place had not been abandoned in panic. It had been left behind with care, which meant whoever used it likely meant to return, but they never did. And the reason why may have been recorded on the deepest wall in the cave, in a panel of symbols no one has been able to read to this day. The deepest panel lay beyond a fracture so narrow that only one person at a time could reach it. At first, the team almost missed it, because the passage turned sharply and dropped into a pocket of darkness, untouched even by the first camera sweep. When the space was finally mapped, it revealed a smooth back wall coated in dark mineral film, almost black under artificial light. Across that surface ran the most complex inscription in the entire cave. It was longer than anything found in the archive chamber. Denser, more carefully arranged. The symbols were cut into horizontal bands with near-perfect spacing, and at the bottom of the panel sat a carved image unlike anything else in the site. A line of human figures facing a circle suspended above a split mountain shape, with streams of marks falling downward between them. Some researchers thought it might represent a flood. Others argued for a meteor shower. A few believed it recorded a sky event so dramatic that it became the reason the cave mattered in the first place. What pushed that theory forward was the geology outside. Sediment cores taken from the basin below the ridge revealed a violent environmental break around the same broad period as the cave's later use. Dust composition changed. Burn layers appeared in the wider region. Animal migration patterns, reconstructed from nearby fossil evidence, shifted abruptly. It looked as if the people who used the cave lived through a period of instability, drought, fire, or sudden climate stress, strong enough to reshape the land around them. If the signs on the final wall recorded that crisis, then the cave may have served a purpose beyond storage or ritual. It may have been built as insurance. A vault for memory. A place where a threatened people tried to preserve what they knew before. The world outside changed faster than they could control. That idea only gained force when residue analysis on several tablets detected traces of red ochre, charcoal binder, and plant oils not found naturally in the chamber. In other words, some of the stones had been deliberately treated as if certain records were made to stand apart from the rest. Priority texts, special lessons, sacred accounts. No one could say for sure, but the more specialists looked, the harder it became to call this primitive. that word started disappearing from serious discussions around the site. Because primitive people do not carve ordered symbolic archives into sealed chambers, revisit them across generations, align records to sky cycles, and apparently create designated rooms for sound, instruction, and preservation. Whatever else these people were, they were cognitively modern in ways that older models had badly underestimated. And that is where the cave became dangerous, not physically, but intellectually. Because once you admit one group did this 30,000 years ago, you are forced to confront a much larger possibility. How many other signs of deep human complexity have we already missed? How many caves were flooded, collapsed, eroded, looted, or simply never recognized for what they were? How many symbolic systems vanished without leaving enough pieces behind to be taken seriously? This is why the sealed cave changed the conversation. Not because it gave us neat answers, but because it destroyed the comfort of our timeline. We like history to move in clean steps. First, this, then that. First survival, then culture. First speech, then memory, then records, then civilization. But the cave refused to obey that order. It suggested that somewhere in the deep human past, intelligence, symbolism, teaching, and preservation had already reached a level far beyond what we once allowed. And still, even with all of that, the greatest mystery in the cave was not the archive. It was the empty space beside it. One full recess on the eastern wall had been carved to hold tablets and stood completely bare. No fragments beneath it. No broken slabs nearby. Nothing fallen in the dust. Just an empty place where something important had once been removed before the cave was sealed. Which means the oldest archive ever found may not be complete, and whatever was taken out may have been the most important part of the whole story. That missing section changed the mood of the investigation more than any dating result ever could. Until then, the cave felt like a miracle of preservation. A message accidentally saved by geology. But an empty shelf means choice. It means someone stood in that chamber, selected specific tablets, and carried them away before the entrance was lost. That one act transformed the people in the cave from passive victims of time into decisions. They knew something was happening. They understood value, and in a moment we cannot reconstruct, they chose what stayed, and what left with them into the dark world outside. No trace of those missing records has ever been found. Not in nearby sinkholes. Not in surrounding shelters. Not in later campsites. If they survived elsewhere, they remain hidden. If they were destroyed, then part of the oldest known archive vanished with the people who tried to save it. And that is what gives this story its final weight. Because the impossible thing inside the cave was never just the symbols, or the tablets, or the astronomical carvings. It was the realization that 30,000 years ago, human beings may already have feared the loss of knowledge enough to build a place like this at all. Think about that. They were not only hunting, crossing harsh land, and enduring a brutal climate. They were also worried about memory, about what would disappear if no one protected it, about how to carry meaning beyond a single lifetime. That is not a small step in human history. That is one of the biggest steps of all. Today, the cave remains closed to the public. The air inside is monitored constantly. Foot traffic is restricted. Light exposure is limited. Every object removed from the chamber is scanned, modeled, stored, and argued over by teams from multiple disciplines, each trying to answer the same impossible question from a different angle. Was this writing? Was it proto-writing? Was it a ritual code, a teaching system, a lunar archive, a survival manual, a sacred calendar, or something with no true modern equivalent? The honest answer is that we still do not know. But uncertainty does not make the find smaller. It makes it bigger. Because if even half of the strongest interpretations hold, then the cave forces a rewrite of what we think intelligence looked like in deep time. It means organized thought, preserved knowledge, and symbolic systems may have emerged not once, late and neatly, but many times, in different forms, among people history never gave enough credit. And maybe the most haunting detail of all is the simplest one. Those handprints on the wall. Large hands, small hands, one with fused fingers, mark after mark, chamber after chamber, as if the same person kept returning to check the archive, teach the next child, or finish one more record before the outside world changed for good. That person had no idea their marks would outlive kingdoms, No idea that after 30,000 years of darkness, strangers would step into their chamber and realize the old story about our ancestors was incomplete. A sealed cave in the desert was supposed to give us silence. Instead, it gave us a voice from a vanished world one, calm enough to carve stone, patient enough to organize memory, and advanced enough to leave behind something that still should not exist. And here's the part that should keep every archaeologist awake at night. This cave was found by accident, not by a grand expedition. Not by a satellite scan, not by some perfect scientific plan, by chance. Which means the ground beneath us may still be hiding other chambers, other archives, other impossible messages from people we have misunderstood for far too long. And if one sealed cave was enough to rewrite the story of human intelligence, imagine what the next one might say.